Thank you very much for introduction and welcome everyone, and especially for the little kids who are able to stay throughout this long talks that we're having. So I'm going to tell you more about how the brain works when we are reading. So before doing that, let's all get our brains working. Can we all stand up? I know we've been sitting for a while, so we need to get our brains, get the blood to our brains. So let's start with wiggling our toes and then wiggling our hands. And then we could say, make a human letter word like how are you? So how as an H, like a human letter. That's how do you do R? I think this way or the other way, R. And then Y for you. Or you want to do the letter U. Okay, are we awake? Okay, feel free to keep standing up or you want to sit down, that's fine. So in this section, I'm going to take a look into our brains in terms of what it does when we are reading. And some of you may have seen this before, so it's another practice. So here you see an image of the brain. Let me try this one. Okay. Here, it's actually showing our brain from this side, and this one is showing our brain from the front. Okay, we call this the sagittal view for the kids who want to learn a harder word, and then a coronal view, like a crown, okay, when we look at it this way. So when our brain grows and learns, connections between different parts of the brain are created. And over time, these connections build networks. And networks are different parts of the brain working together. Like a well-trained musical group or orchestra, brain networks help us to learn skills like reading. So while we learn, the cells of the brain called neurons, okay, here they connect together by reaching out their tiny hands called axons, or by growing new hands. And over time, many of these axons actually connect with each other and build long highways called the white matter tracts or fibers. And these highways allow information from one part of the brain to travel to the other part of the brain. And we also have this fluid in our brain called the cerebrospinal fluid that flows in and out of our brain and spinal cords to help cushion them from injury, as well as providing nutrients. So, what are the brain regions involved in processing language? Now, we have very funny sounding names here in our brains, but actually some of them are named after scientists or doctors who found out about what that brain region is involved in the brain. So we have this area called the Broca's area, named after Dr. Broca, okay? And it's involved in the production of speech. And in this green area over here is called Wernicke's area. And guess why is it called Wernicke's? It's named after Dr. Wernicke, okay? And he found that this region is involved in understanding of speech. And our motor cortex over here helps to control the movement of muscles, and in this case is the movement of our muscle that help us to produce speech. And we have this very thick fiber strands over here that connects all these areas together, the Wernicke's area to the Broca's area, so that we can both understand what people say as well as producing speech. So, as you remember what Dr. Beth just shared earlier, reading requires phonics decoding. This process involves phonemic awareness of the sound from the letter pattern of spelling that we see in the word, and we need to decode the phonics in order to read the word. So here we have sh, e, p, sheep, right? No guessing here, but just to breaking it down for you. And then how do you say this? Yes, very good. But how do we break it up? D, k, right? It's a bit trickier for those of us who already know how to read. And scientists have learned that we can read because the different parts of our brain become more active and communicate with each other as we learn. So when we see the word cat, right, information actually comes into the back of our brain and then send them into this area of the brain that tries to process decode the word, and then send them to the front of the brain that sound out the word. And we also have a part of the brain here in the lower part that tells us the meaning of the word. Okay. Now, we also have other regions of the brain that is involved in reading with also very funny sounding names. So here we have the occipital temporal region that is helping us to process the word that comes in, or sometimes we call it the visual word form area or the letterbox area, okay, word letterbox area. Then we also have the parietal temporal region that's was involved in phonological processing, or how we play with the sounds of language. So like what Dr. Beth mentioned earlier, we know the word banana without B sounds like anana, right? And then we also have the inferior frontal gyrus that acts as a captain in our brain that directs all the information to tell us what to do. Now, during reading, we activate what we call a dorsal stream, this process, where there is this grapheme to phoneme conversion or letter to sound conversion going on. At the same time, we also activate this ventral stream, which is the lexicosemantic processing stream that was also mentioned earlier in Beth's talk, where we do the word to meaning conversion. Now, sometimes, as our brain learn to talk and also talk more to each other, these highways or fibers get stronger and stronger. But sometimes the information transmission is very smooth, like riding a bicycle on wide roads on a sunny day. And sometimes it becomes challenging when the weather gets really bad and windy. The roads may be windy and narrow, or there's a lot of red lights. Okay, it doesn't go as smooth, especially for kids who are starting to learn, or sometimes when children who have difficulty reading. So what happens, okay, when we read different languages? So our brain process reading largely in the same way when we do read any language, but there are also some differences. So scientists have looked at reading Chinese and English and found that reading mainly engaged mostly the left side of our brain. However, reading Chinese, we tend to engage a little bit more on the right side. In addition, when we read Chinese, we engage more on the region that's called address phonology, where the sound of the word is stored in memory. Whereas reading English, we tend to engage a little bit more of this assembled phonology, where sounds are put together to make a word. And in Singapore, as we've learned from Dr. Susie's talk earlier, we have a unique bilingual profile with different levels of language exposure. Quite a lot of us, due to our environmental influences, may not learn our mother tongue languages as well as compared to English, which is used every day in the school systems. So in our lab, we want to understand how our brain processes the different languages in Singapore and how they are used here, and how we can help our kids or little ones to be able to learn both languages just as well. So why do we want to look into the brain to do this? In reading, we found that different written scripts of languages actually have this different orthographic depth that Beth talked about earlier, which means the letter to phoneme or word to sound mapping. In languages such as Malay and Tamil, they are a little bit more transparent or shallow because of a more direct word to sound to word conversion. Whereas in Chinese characters, it's considered a little bit more deep or opaque, where there's less of this word to sound conversion, but more of direct word to meaning conversion going on. So the different networks or streams that we talked about earlier may be engaged differently in the different types of language. So how do we look into the brain to look at this? We use an MRI machine. So what is an MRI machine? M stands for magnetic. So it's like a huge magnet. R stands for resonance, which is using radio frequency waves. And I is imaging, which is taking pictures in our brain. So the MRI machine works like a large camera taking pictures of different parts of our body. Especially for our cases, we want to take pictures of the brain. And how does MRI works? It does so by measuring signals coming from different part of our bodies, by measuring the signals coming from the water molecules in our body. So every single part of the body is a little bit different. And because of that, the MRI signal coming from each part differs a little as well. So using computers, scientists put together all these different signals, and they help us to form very nice pictures of our brain. Here, we can see that using structural MRI, that means taking pictures of the structure of the brains, it allows us to look at it very clearly, what we call high resolution or very good pictures. You can see this is what we call the gray matter in the brain and the white matter, as well as the cerebrospinal fluid, which is black here, that's filling the ventricles of our brain. We can also take pictures that tells us what's going on in the brain, and that's brain function, okay? And here we see when we are asked to like read letters or words in the scanner, we can get what we call activity in the brain. And this shows the brain of a child who is a Chinese bilingual while they are reading Chinese words in the scanner. And this red and yellow blobs here shows the areas of the brain that is activated while the child is reading the Chinese characters. So in our neuroimaging labs, we have a very special team that will bring our little ones on an MRI space mission to help us investigate what's going on in our brains when we read different languages. In this space mission, our astronauts will travel to different planets, going through Venus, Mercury, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and to gather clues to reach the mystery planet at the end to complete the mission. And so I hope the little ones will consider whether you want to join us on this journey. Now let's see what we do in the MRI space mission here. Okay, so I hope that you'll find this fun and want to join us on one of these space missions. So here I invite you to scan this QR code that you can find out more about these studies, as well as we have a Science of Reading blog that can provide you both tips and fun activities for reading with your kids. So thank you very much, and let's connect.